It's no secret that Commander as a format has been speeding up over time. 10 years ago, you wouldn't think twice about a game that went 12 turns or longer. But now, it feels like there's always someone ready to win by turn 6 or 7. And while I personally don't mind a longer game, I've come to understand just how important every turn is, including turn 1. And sure, it'd be great if we could always draw an opening hand of Sol Ring into Signet, but if my math is correct, the odds of that happening are less than 1%. Unless, of course, your name is Terran, in which case it's like 50%. Regardless, my point is that, as Commander players, we need to start seriously thinking about what we want our deck to do on turn 1. And I'm not saying you can't win a game if your first turn is simply tap land and pass. For plenty of decks, that's perfectly fine. What I am saying is that each turn in Commander matters, and if you want to make stronger decks that win more games, you should have a plan. And while you certainly could throw 15 different 1-drops into a deck to make sure you've got something to do on turn 1, there's actually another way to more or less guarantee you curve out. 1 mana value commanders. I am currently obsessed with 1 mana value commanders. Not only is it great to always have a play on that first turn, but it also makes it that much easier to get your game plan online. And even if your commander is removed, it only takes 3 mana to recast and rebuild. Furthermore, 1 mana commanders give you turn 1 access to any of the Commander 2020 free spells, and any of the flare spells in your color identity. That's extremely powerful. Of course, this does come at a cost. First, the majority of 1 mana commander options are a single color, which for me personally makes deck building more interesting and enjoyable, but it will generally lower the overall power of your deck. The second downside I've already alluded to. Generally speaking, 1 mana creatures are not as strong as creatures with a higher mana value. Don't get me wrong, they're still plenty powerful. Just remember that you're not playing something busted like Voya Jaws of the Conclave or Joda the Unifier. In other words, your deck has to do the heavy lifting because you can't rely on your commander to win you the game all by itself. Moving on, let's talk about your actual options for a 1 mana commander before I share my personal favorites. There are actually 43 legendary permanents that can be your commander and technically cost a single mana or less. Even after you remove the outliers like Omarthis, Ghostfire Initiate, and Haldir, Lorien Lieutenant that can't actually be cast on turn 1, you're still left with 39 options to choose from that all fall within 3 general categories. First are the partner commanders, and if you're looking for raw strength, this is the category for you, as these 1 mana legendaries can be paired with another, more powerful creature that can support your game plan and provides access to additional colors. They are also more flexible and work with more strategies than the other 2 categories I'll mention. Sadly, there are only 4 options for partner commanders at 1 mana value or less. The first is Rograk, son of Roga, Yoshimaru Everfaithful, K9 Mark I, and Cultist of the Absolute. Rograk, son of Roga is likely the best of the bunch, as he costs 0 mana to cast and provides access to potentially 3 colors when paired with creatures like Silas Wren, Seeker Adept, Thrasios, Triton Hero, or Timna the Weaver. He also supports a ton of different strategies, like Voltron, Keyword Soup, +1/+1 counters, Aristocrats, and more. That said, as far as turn 1 plays go, he's actually not that good. By himself, he doesn't actually do anything, and most decks that play him typically use him as either sacrifice fodder, or to enable free interaction, or turn on a Springleaf Drum or Mox Amber. Notably, you can also pair Rograk with Yoshimaru Everfaithful, which would give you 2 guaranteed plays on turn 1. I could definitely see that being a very powerful +1/+1 counter / legendary typal deck. Looking at the other partner commanders, you've got K9 Mark I, which I'm actually kind of fond of and is the only 1 mana commander that can support 4 colors thanks to the 14th Doctor. You've also got Yoshimaru Everfaithful, whom I already mentioned, and Cultist of the Absolute, which can be paired with a background commander from Baldur's Gate. Moving on, let's talk about dual-faced and level-up commanders next. These 1-drop commanders are unique in that when they hit the field, they are relatively weak, but they get stronger over time when you pay some mana or a condition is met. Frodo Sauron's Bane is a good example of this category. He enters as a 1/2 creature, but can be turned into a 2/3 with lifelink, and then again into a pseudo-flage that can one-shot a player as long as the ring has tempted you 4 or more times. Bruce Banner, who hasn't actually been released yet, And Kellen, Planar Trailblazer, similarly only require a mana investment to level up or transform. Flipwalkers like Kithion, Hero of Akros, Grist, Voracious Larva, and Tamio, Inquisitive Student also fit this category, alongside other dual-face cards like Cecil, Dark Knight, and Valentine, Dean of the Vein. It's worth noting that most of these commanders are 2 or more colors, and they often support multiple themes and strategies. Finally, the last category is what I call the true 1-mana commanders. These are cards that are 1-mana creatures, and that is all. They don't flip, transform, or upgrade. What you see is what you get, and you don't get to lean on any other cards in the command zone. That said, some of them are still very strong in their own right, and like I mentioned earlier, these are the cards that I find most enjoyable to build around. Although I will admit that there are a few duds I wouldn't recommend. Going by color, let's start with white. Aunt May enables some interesting life gain strategies, and might be the best commander option if you want to build a deck with every Ajani Pridemate variant available. Basri, Tomorrow's Champion, is a slow token generator with a cycling ability that's better suited to the 99. Isamaru, Hound of Konda, is literally a vanilla tutu. Momo, Friendly Flyer, is a mana dork for flying creatures, and could helm a very interesting deck built around 3-mana flying creatures, like Tempest Hawk, for example. Momo, Playful Pet, provides 3 unique Leaves the Battlefield triggers, allowing for a lot of flexibility in deck building. Skrelv, Defector Mite, protects other creatures and makes them difficult to block while adding poison counters. He could definitely helm a combat damage deck, or a poison deck with a proliferation subtheme. Stiltskin, Moogle Merchant, is probably the only bad gifts commander in mono white, and he draws you cards. Very nice. The Duke, Rebel Sentry, is a Mother of Runes knockoff, though he could work in some kind of counters deck. Zach Fair is similar and probably better suited to the 99. Errant Street Artist has a very unique ability that is actually hard to take advantage of in mono blue. Gran provides a really great mana discount if you can get some lessons in your graveyard. While there are only a few good options right now, the upcoming Strixhaven set may be all Gran needs to really shine. If nothing else, she's also a 1-mana looter. Lady Octopus Inspired Inventor is a super strong artifact commander that can quickly cheat out powerful artifacts if left unchecked. Ashnod Flesh Mechanist is a mono-black artifact commander that could also support an aristocrat subtheme. The Last Ride is a mana-intensive draw engine that could be built in any number of ways, including some sort of self-damage style deck to take advantage of its 13/13 base power and toughness. Tiny Bones the Pickpocket is an interesting card advantage and graveyard hate piece that can play to the power of any table as long as you can get in for damage. Freya Crescent is the only 1-mana red mana dork that I'm aware of. Sure, it's restricted to equipment, but that's still incredibly powerful in my opinion. Norrin Swift Survivalist is also very unique, letting you turn unfavorable blocks into a pseudo bounce effect. You could build him as a mana-intensive mono-red blink deck. Norrin the Wary is actually one of the strongest and most popular 1-mana value commanders. Utilizing various other Enter's effects, Norrin can quickly mill or drain the table. Quicksilver Brash Brute hasn't released yet, but is basically just a 1/1 with haste and an expensive ability. Ragavan Nimble Pilferer is a notoriously powerful 1-drop that can support treasure themes, exile matters, theft, and even pirate typal. Rosnak, Hair of Roga, is an interesting token generator that requires targeted spells. That said, Rosnak only makes 0/1 kobolds, so you've got your work cut out for you. Spinneret and Spiderling is a very interesting Exile Matters commander. Ignoring the Spider synergy altogether makes the most sense to me, as you just need a way to pump her power by 3 to immediately start taking advantage of her draw ability. Important to note, her trigger works with any damage, to a creature or player, and even if she's not in combat. On top of that, the card you exile can be played until your next turn, which is rare among effects like this, especially at just 1 mana. Zergo Bellstriker is another vanilla tutu, except he's even worse than Isamaru because he can barely block. Ovia Pashiri, Sage Lifecrafter, is the only mono-green option so far, and can be built with artifact synergies, go-wide synergies, and more. A surprisingly flexible option in my opinion. Reese the Redeemed is a classic go-wide token commander in 2 colors. Zabaz the Glimmerwasp is kind of interesting. Unfortunately, his abilities are quite narrow and you're basically shoehorned on how to build your deck. That said, if modular is interesting to you, then Zabaz is your bug. Finally, Hope of Girapur is a colorless 1-drop that has a very difficult to use ability. Since you have to use it on your turn, you're basically guessing as to which player might pop off next. I'd probably pass on this one. And that's it. Literally every possible choice for a 1-mana commander. Hopefully, you feel inspired to build around one of these unique creatures. But if not, let me share with you my top 3 picks. As I said earlier, I'm obsessed with building around these legendary permanents, and I have 3 deck lists to share. First up, Momo Playful Pet is a smorgasbord of fun cards, and I love it. Because Momo's ability triggers when he leaves the battlefield for any reason, I'm able to take advantage of several different strategies at the same time. Blink, bounce, and sacrifice. I'm actually using blink effects the least, as they are typically expensive and make more sense as a cheap way to reuse an ETB from a more mana-intensive creature. Since Momo costs a single mana, repeatable bounce spells are often better. My deck currently only runs 2 blink engines, Teleportation Circle and the Eternal Wanderer, both of which made the cut because they can also blink artifacts, like a Racer's Scoreboard to draw or a Thousand Moon Smithy to make a big beater. For bounce, I've got cards like Getaway Car, Light the Way, Essence Reliquary, Erratic Portal, and more. I especially like Essence Reliquary and Light the Way as they can bounce any permanent, not just Momo. To sacrifice Momo, I've got Witch's Oven, Skull Clamp, Martyr's Cause, and Trading Post, among others. Of course, I've also got a bit of reanimation to bring Momo back out of the yard, including cards like Custody Soul Color, Abiding Grace, Scout for Survivors, and more. Now, I know, that's a lot of cards dedicated to triggering Momo's ability, but which mode am I choosing? That's actually the fun part for me. I don't know. It depends on what I need in that moment, what I have in play, and what's in my hand. Maybe I've got a Dusk Legion Duelist in play, so I'm giving that counters to draw me cards. Or maybe I've got an Academy Manufactor out, so I'm making food, treasure, and clue tokens instead. I might even be using the Scry option to cast free spells with the Planetarium of Wan Shi Tong. The deck has synergies to take advantage of everything Momo is doing. That said, the deck leans most into artifact shenanigans, and so when in doubt, I typically make a food token. This deck generally wins by applying early pressure to my opponents while slowly building an army of big beaters and outpacing my opponents after a board wipe. I also want to call out Xenu Keen-Eyed Protector. Since Momo is a flying legendary creature, I almost always have a free attack at one of my opponents, which means I can almost always bring Xenu back from exile. This lets me use cards like Path to Exile and Argent Dais to purposefully exile my own Xenu to ramp or draw cards, before bringing her back each combat. You can find a link to my full deck list in the description of this video. Next, Freya Crescent is actually a super unique equipment commander, and here's why. Consistency. As much as I enjoy the flexibility of Momo, Freya is the opposite. She supports an incredibly streamlined equipment game plan that's faster than any other equipment commander out there. Well, assuming no fast mana. Just think about it. With Freya as your commander, you've got a guaranteed turn 1 mana dork in the command zone, meaning you can cast any 3 mana equipment on turn 2. And then on turn 3, you can equip and attack, likely hitting face as Freya has flying. What other commander can do that by turn 3? Now, your first thought might be to play something like an Oops All Swords deck, where you're constantly suiting up Freya with more and more equipment. And that's a fine strategy. However, after those initial 3 turns, Freya's mana advantage actually falls off, since you can't tap her for mana and attack with her in the same turn. Not only that, but other commanders like Arden Intrepid Archaeologist or Captain America First Avenger will quickly outscale Freya, as their mana advantage is significantly stronger. So the question becomes, how do you take that initial mana advantage that is unique to Freya and translate it into the rest of the game? For me, the answer is tempo control and stacks. I'm running 11 specific equipment that can provide an escalating amount of value if Freya sticks on the field. Assuming I mulligan until I have one of these equipment in hand, my game plan is to quickly suit up Freya with just a single powerful equipment, and then sit back and protect my board while controlling the tempo of the game. This means my deck runs around 30 removal and stacks pieces, including cards like Mage's Contest, Tybalt's Trickery, Sphere of Resistance, Smoke, and even 3 cards that fall under Massland Destruction, which my pod is okay with. Generally, the game plan enabler equipment in my deck fall into 3 categories. Equipment that let me deal massive damage all by themselves, like Blackblade Reforged or Quietus Spike. Cards that generate tokens like Anduril Flame of the West or Sigiled Sword of Valoron. And equipment that just provide insane value, like Sword of Feast and Famine or the Buster Sword. As backup plans, the deck also runs Slicer Hired Muscle and Alexios Deimos of Cosmos. And while I haven't had a chance to test this deck extensively, in the games I have played with it, it's been strangely effective at both being a threat while somehow staying under the radar. If you want to build this deck without any mass land destruction, I would recommend swapping my cards out with an additional Wrath like Molten Disaster, which won't hurt Freya because she has flying on your turn. You could also slot in additional equipment like Wrecking Ball Arm or Umezawa's Jite, or even some more creatures like Kedis Emberclaw Familiar or Silent Arbiter. As with Momo, you can find a link to my deck list in the description below. Finally, Ashnod Flesh Mechanist is one of only 3 commanders that makes Power Stone tokens, and one of those is a melded creature, so I'm not even sure if it counts. Either way, this alone makes Ashnod pretty unique, and there are a few directions you could take this deck. For me, I've always liked Power Stone tokens, and I wanted a deck that could consistently generate 5 or more Power Stone tokens every game. To accomplish that, I need to guarantee that Ashnod has a sacrifice target and a safe attack each turn. Let's talk about that first, and then we'll get into what I'm doing with those Power Stone tokens. Since Ashnod will always be my turn 1 play, turn 2 is dedicated to casting something I can sacrifice. My deck has 12 creatures that cost either 1 or 2 mana and are basically free to sacrifice. In fact, almost all of them can either return themselves from my graveyard to the battlefield or back to my hand. Cards like Haunt of the Dead Marshes, Bloodghast, Dogged Detective, Reassembling Skeleton, and more. Several of these creatures can even use my Power Stone tokens to pay for their graveyard abilities. As such, those are the best cards to get in my opening hand. I'll also mention Carionet as a sacrifice option. While it can't return itself from the graveyard to my hand or battlefield, it can be activated from my graveyard to remove a creature at instant speed, and again, that cost can be paid for with Power Stone mana. Neat! Outside of these creatures, I also run cards like Jadar, Ghoul Caller of Nephalia, and Lord Skitter, Sewer King, that make a free token each turn that I can sacrifice to Ashnod's attack trigger. Of course, all of this is pointless if Ashnod dies in combat, as spending 3 mana to recast her really slows down my game plan. And while for the first couple turns, there's often one player who is wide open, it doesn't take long before the board is filled with unfavorable attacks. To get around that, I run a small package of cards that make Ashnod difficult to block by either giving her a huge stat boost with cards like Adaptive Omnitool or Nettlecyst, or by giving her First Strike, which pairs extremely well with Death Touch. Cards like Moonsilver Spear, Sword of Vengeance, Hidden Blade, or my favorite option in the deck, the Masamune, which not only gives Ashnod First Strike, but forces my opponents to block, meaning it works as pseudo-removal. And since all of these cards can be cast and equipped with Power Stone mana, they're all easy to get online fairly early. I also run a few removal spells that can protect Ashnod in combat. Deadly Rollick and Flare of Malice can both be cast for free, and Asterion's Thirst works as both a combat trick and removal spell. Now, if everything goes according to plan, I should be able to safely attack with Ashnod, sacrifice a creature, and create 1 Power Stone token each combat. I know it sounds like a lot of moving pieces, but the deck is actually fairly consistent. And by the time anyone is seriously looking at my board, I'll typically have around 4 or 5 Power Stone tokens in play. And by that point, it might be too late, as I'm already generating 8 or more mana each turn, meaning I can switch to phase 2 of my deck's plan. Clues. There actually aren't a ton of options for repeatedly making clues in mono black, but my deck runs pretty much all of them, and that's for a few reasons. First, clues are an excellent way to draw cards when you've got a lot of Power Stone token mana. Second, I run several artifact and clue payoffs, like Cranial Plating, Monumental Corruption, and Tamio's Journal. And third, Persuasive Interrogators. That's right, my Ashnod deck has a secret game plan of winning through poison counters. Don't worry, I'm only half serious. While the poison counters from Persuasive Interrogators is certainly one of my finishers, that's like Plan C at best. The deck prefers to win by running the table over with some Giant Tramplers or Flying Angels, though I once won a game by activating Karn Living Legacy's -7 ability when I had around 15 artifacts in play, including Unwinding Clock. I also want to call out one particularly ridiculous card in my deck, Altar of Shadows. This is an insanely mana-intense removal engine that I've always wanted to play. And so, despite its inefficiency, I jammed it in my Ashnod list. And I have, in fact, destroyed multiple creatures with its activated ability. Check that off my bucket list. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you feel inspired to build a deck around a 1-mana commander, or at the very least, check out one of my lists in the description. And if you do, please let me know what you think in the comments and share any ideas you have that can improve my decks based on the theme and game plan I've described. And if you'd like some help from me building a deck around a 1-mana commander, you can join our Patreon at the Dumpster Denizen tier, where members get to either send me an existing deck list and receive a detailed breakdown of its strengths and weaknesses, what I'd cut and add, etc., or you can put me to work, making a deck list from scratch based on your theme or idea. A link to the Patreon will also be in the description of this video. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.